Welcome to Daily Drive for Thursday, April 30th, 2026. I'm Kellen Walker in Las Vegas. Today on the show, lots of news in automakers' earnings results. Ford expects tariff refunds to catapult its full-year earnings. VW plans even more cost cuts, and the Fed's refusal to cut rates compounds affordability problems. Plus, our own Doug Bolduc tells us what he saw and heard at this week's Beijing Auto Show, and about how Chinese brands are positioning themselves for a global blitz.
They are so confident now that their products can really find buyers in markets outside of China. The Chinese are ready to compete on the global scale.
Let's run through all the news you need to know to keep up in the auto industry. Ford is posting first quarter net income of $2.5 billion, and it's raising its full-year earnings forecast. That's because it expects to get a $1.3 billion refund of tariffs it has already paid, nearly triple what crosstown rival General Motors expects to receive. Ford said it isn't sure when it will receive the one-time money. CFO Sherry House says Ford's underlying business outperformed expectations in the quarter. Revenue rose 6% to over $43 billion. Adjusted earnings before interest and taxes more than tripled to $3.5 billion. Meanwhile, Stellantis' earnings turned positive in the first quarter. That's after the automaker benefited from rising demand in North America for its refreshed Jeep and Ram models. The automaker's net profit climbed to $440 million for the period, after it lost about the same amount a year ago. And Volkswagen Group is cutting even more after its first quarter operating profit fell 14% to just under $3 billion. The automaker is absorbing billions in tariff costs while battling competition from Chinese rivals both in China and increasingly in Europe. Executives say the automaker must fundamentally overhaul its business as tariffs, geopolitical shocks, and weak car demand batter the industry. VW is trimming excess capacity and is already cutting 50,000 jobs in Germany by 2030. And those are today's headlines. You can find more details on all those stories at autonews.com. On Wednesday, the Fed stood pat, deciding against cutting its benchmark interest rate despite heavy pressure from the Trump administration. It's Jerome Powell's last rate decision as Fed chair. Keeping the rate where it is might help buffer inflation as the Iran war drives up fuel prices, but it doesn't help much when it comes to auto affordability problems. Our own Paige Hodder has been writing about the Fed's decision and its implications for us at Automotive News, and she joins me now to talk about it. Paige, welcome back to Daily Drive.
Thanks for having me.
So, Paige, what does this all mean for dealers and their customers?
It basically means that auto loan interest rates are not going down anytime soon, or at the very least, they're not going down significantly. And that means the affordability situation will continue to remain how it is, which is kind of tough, especially for low income and medium income buyers. And I spoke to some experts who said that it's really the used car buyer who's getting a little screwed here, because on the new side, depending on your credit, you have access to some incentives or programs that might give you a nicer interest rate or, payment or something like that. That's not really an option on the used side. So if you can't afford a new car, but you need to buy a car, so you have to look at the used market, you're going to be likely stuck with a higher interest rate for a while now.
Now, you spoke with Edmunds head of Insights, Jessica Caldwell, who said affordability constraints also can interrupt the sales process at the dealership. Explain that.
Yeah, so it's all about expectations. If you haven't been in the market for a little while, which, sometimes people haven't been, affordability has been this way for a few years now, but depending on how long, people keep their cars, sometimes 5, 6, 7 years, maybe they haven't bought a car since 2019. And if they don't know what payments are, if they don't know really how expensive this thing is going to be, they might come in and, decide on a car and negotiate a price and then get to the end of the process and not be able to afford that monthly payment or not even be approved for that loan. And, that causes frustration on both sides. The customer is really disappointed because they've gotten excited about this vehicle, and the salesperson thought they had a done deal, and now they have to start over. And so she sort of suggested that we might have to start, and I've heard this from other sales and F&I folks I've talked to in dealerships, which is, talking about budget much earlier in the process than I think people expect, to really manage expectations and maybe steer someone towards a lower trim model or a smaller car if their budget is tighter.
Perfect. Paige, always great talking to you. Thank you so much for joining me.
Thank you.
Coming up, a look at this week's Beijing Auto Show and what it tells us about how ready Chinese brands are to take over new markets. That's next on Daily Drive.
The auto industry talks a lot about the software-defined vehicle, but the SDV space race is already creating clear winners and losers.
It's kind of a Frankenstein's monster of IP.
On this week's episode of the Automotive News Shift podcast, I'm joined by Alex Euler, Consulting Director at SBD Automotive. We break down who's leading in the SDV race, why Tesla and other EV-only brands have an edge, and whether newer EV automakers can keep their lead as legacy brands try to catch up. Plus, we'll hear about the latest Chinese tech on display at the Beijing Auto Show this past week. I'm Molly Boygon. Join me on Shift, available this Sunday wherever you get your podcasts.
Welcome back to Daily Drive. I'm Kellen Walker. The Beijing Auto Show offered a window into how Chinese automakers are evolving their brands and preparing for global expansion. Chinese brands are moving beyond just competing on price. They're building real brand identities. Doug Bolduc is managing editor of Automotive News Europe. He spoke with Daily Drive executive producer Jake Neer about his visit to Beijing and what it revealed about the competitive threat Chinese automakers pose to legacy brands.
Doug Bolduc, always great to have you, and it always seems like you're on the road when we talk here. You just got back from Beijing. Thanks for taking the time to join us while you're in transit.
Thanks, Jake. Really happy to be here and to talk a little bit about what I saw and experienced in Beijing.
I'm so fascinated by this. Start off with your big takeaways. For obviously you write for the European auto audience, and we're talking largely to an American audience here. So what were the big things in your mind this year that are new and exciting and maybe even alarming for certain people?
What the big difference was from the past shows that I've attended is that it was a lot more businesslike. It was more about showing product. It was less gimmicky and fewer games. They really have just tightened things up with the Chinese automakers because they're becoming global players. So you don't have to do funny things to get people to pay attention to you. And also because it is such a battle in their domestic market, I think that maybe they've had to sort of tighten the budget a little bit because you just have to watch every single penny. And one of the reasons why there's such a push to expand the Chinese automakers is because the domestic market is so competitive right now.
You spoke to a bunch of Chinese brands, mostly folks who are focused on the European market, but let's start with Zeekr, because this was a really interesting conversation that you had with them. Talk about where they're trying to go as a brand right now.
Well, they're already in 16 European markets, and they're trying to kind of straddle that line between premium and volume with a focus on being premium, going after buyers of BMWs, Audis, and Mercedes. Really, really incredibly difficult market to get into. None of the Chinese have been able to crack it. Be interesting to see if they can do it. But one of the things that we saw that has the potential to really catch people's eyes is the 8X. The 8X is a long-range plug-in hybrid. They didn't commit to bringing it to Europe, but it's the kind of vehicle with a range of about 1,400 kilometers. And the mixture of the electric and the gasoline engine to power the battery, you just don't have any range anxiety. And the car does 0 to 62 miles per hour, 100 kph in less than 4 seconds. So you're obviously not giving up on performance. So that was a very interesting vehicle, especially for anybody who's still facing range anxiety. And I know in the US market, where there's still a great deal of concern about the infrastructure, to have a vehicle that is mostly an electric car, but you can still go, I guess, 800 miles on a full tank and a full battery is pretty impressive.
So you spoke with Stefan Seelauf there for Zeekr. What did he tell you about sort of the way that the design is leading them into this sort of new era for them and also other Chinese brands?
What was really impressive when speaking to Stefan, a longtime designer with tons of years with the German automakers, was that he was talking about how European design has really, really just infiltrated into the Chinese design. And one of the things that was quite impressive is that I think that he and some of his colleagues are really appreciating the freedom that they have to really push the envelope. When you work for a very established company, you have to follow all of these design rules because there are designs that you want to continue to pay respect to. But with these newer brands, they really just have a white sheet of paper and they can create more so than continue a design philosophy. So they're actually creating the next generation.
We come from a very long tradition in design. So we learned and grew up in this, let's say, environment of designing cars for very traditional brands. And I think my Chinese bosses understood that these European designers have a knowledge that we have to transfer also to our Chinese colleagues. It is very interesting how well it resonates with our Chinese colleagues, how quick they learn, how talented they are.
And he was talking to me about that Zeekr wants to go even another step further when it comes to luxury. And he's working on that right now, on taking that next step for luxury for that particular brand. And again, if you had spent your career at a Volkswagen or a Ford or a GM, a lot of your designs would probably, again, be continuations of these classic designs. And you might not have had so much freedom as you do in these situations with these young and up-and-coming Chinese brands. And I think that designers really appreciate that.
I think it is very important that our top stakeholder want us to have this possibility to explore things in China that are maybe not visible for everybody, but it's a part of our world. And it is understood that if we look at that and learn about it and digest it, it will help us to get more authenticity into our products now and also in the future.
So you also caught up with Wolfgang Ufer of Smart, pretty familiar name for especially your audience over there in Europe. What are they doing now? What was sort of the interesting thing from that conversation for you?
Well, after so many years of being asked about probably 1.7 million times, what is going to happen with the Smart car, the 4.2 here in Europe, the 2-seat iconic mini car to run around in the cities. They've been asked about, what are you going to do with this? When is it coming back? And they finally had an answer. They had the exterior design for what is going to be the new generation of this car. It's going to be called the hashtag 2, following the naming system that they're using with Smart right now.
And I can tell you it was quite a very positive response already internationally, where we showed the pictures of this concept car, and we are really going back to our DNA product after launching now 4 cars here in different regions.
You could definitely see it was the classic, iconic Smart car of the past, but with some very interesting new highlights. So updated, we're supposed to see an interior for the vehicle very soon. And then in Paris in October, we will see the final version as it starts to come out. They're very, very excited about it in Europe, simply because it's basically synonymous with driving in these big cities like Paris or Rome, because you actually can fit the car between 2 parallel parked cars. You can park it in nose or rear ways in because it's so small. Absolutely perfect in these mega cities where parking spaces are an absolute premium. And I know it also had some fans in the US because of the same issue. You know, in a New York City or in Los Angeles, where parking is at a premium, having one of these little cars that you can almost like put inside your pocket comes in quite handy.
What's interesting from those conversations that you had and others, also that you had in Beijing, it seems like these brands are taking a wider approach to growth than maybe I was aware of or that I was expecting, that they're moving up market fast. They're not relying solely on cost advantage, and they're investing in brand identity and design language. I mean, is it just me, or is that something that people in other markets like the US and Europe really need to take note of?
Oh yeah, I mean, again, there's an incredible maturation of the brands. It used to be you'd see all of these copies, like a G wagon copy, or just so many different copies. Now they feel a lot more confident, and they're doing their own designs. And because, I mean, one of the great advantages that Chinese have is that there is an overall system that says, okay, you are going to get brakes for this much. You are going to get this technology from this much because these superstar technology companies are going to provide it to you en masse. You cannot do that in so many other markets. It gives a massive advantage to the Chinese, because then all of a sudden technology that you have to move up to another class of vehicle, or you'd have to get the highest trim line of a particular vehicle, is basically baked right into the car, because it's not a situation where you're going beyond the affordability line for the automaker. They're not sitting there saying, oh my gosh, I'm not going to make any margin. They're still going to make a margin because they're getting it for such an incredibly low price. And again, that was a lot to do with the Chinese government and the automakers and the technology companies and suppliers working together and saying, all right, our push is going in this direction. And especially with electric cars, it is unbelievable. When you drive on the streets, well, we didn't drive, but when you're driven on the streets in Beijing or Shanghai, it is so many electric cars. It's almost a rarity to see a combustion car. It was interesting. I was looking around for fuel stations. There's still a few, and they weren't packed, but the electric cars are just all over the place. And it's made a massive difference, especially for the quality of the air in the local cities, which used to have so many combustion cars, pumping out those emissions. Now you have the electric cars. Now, granted, some of that electricity is made by coal, so somebody's paying for that, but it's not in downtown Beijing or Shanghai when 50 or whatever percentage of the cars, I don't know the number, but a huge percentage of the cars are electric.
I do want to talk a little bit about what you're hearing about trade. Earlier this week, we heard that Chinese automakers are looking to nearly triple their overseas production to 3.4 million vehicles by 2030. They're really trying to escape brutal competition back home, overcapacity issues, a market that just can't absorb all the cars they're trying to make. So what did you hear about that, if anything, at the Beijing show?
Oh, that is 100% the objective of the automakers. They really want to go outside of China. That has become a major focus, and that is what they're working toward. They are looking at the South American market. Of course, we know a little bit about some cars are going to be going into Canada, Europe. Big ideas and big plans for Europe. Also Malaysia, other parts of Asia. So they know that their future is exporting into as many markets as they can get into. And that's not being hidden. That's right out there in the open for all of the brands.
And what about the trade environment right now? Obviously, tariffs are a major concern. What are they saying to you, or what were you hearing while you were there about the barriers that exist and how Chinese automakers are trying to either get around them or work with them?
Well, I mean, again, I think that there's a pretty strong belief that because of the high tariffs in the U.S. market, that market's really closed. And for them now, okay, they say, all right, we will focus on Europe. There are some penalties to cars that are coming into the market that are electric only, some tariffs and things of that nature. But that's why they're looking to build plants in Europe. So there is sort of a double-edged sword with the Chinese. And again, something that the U.S. market will have to consider. If the cars are built there and sold there, could be beneficial. But I mean, again, the idea to get outside of China is to build plants either using existing plants, brownfield plants, what they're called, or building new plants. and just getting that production. We're hearing also this week that Stellantis is talking with some of the Chinese about utilizing some of their plants that are not building up to capacity. They aren't keeping them busy enough. So they're saying, okay, come on in to the Chinese automaker to start getting the volumes up to the level where the plant basically is running at full capacity utilization.
Doug, anything else that you want to get in before we? I know that you've spent a lot of time there this week, and there's probably a lot to take in. Leave us with any other impressions you got.
I'll kind of circle back to something that we spoke about, was just the very fast maturity of the Chinese brands. And it's happened so much faster, I think, than all of the other brands that we've seen over the years. And it's because there has been a very, very focused overall desire by the government and the automakers working together to achieve this. It's interesting because that kind of level of everybody's going to row in this direction definitely brings some advantages, especially in a time like now when, margins are always so tight. And also, they are so confident now that their products can really find buyers in markets outside of China. They are completely confident that that will happen. And that confidence was an interesting change. And it's a big takeaway from the event, that the Chinese are ready to compete on the global scale.
Doug Bolduc of Automotive News Europe, back near Munich after spending plenty of time in Beijing for the auto show there this week. Doug, thank you so much for taking the time.
Thanks, Jake. Hope to speak to you again soon.
That's Daily Drive for today. I'm Kellen Walker. Thanks to Automotive News executive producer Jake Neer, as well as our own Paige Hodder, Michael Martinez, and Urvash Kakaria for their reporting for today's podcast. You can get the latest news on Chinese brands, earnings results, and everything happening in the auto industry at autonews.com. Come back tomorrow for a preview of Automotive News' upcoming top 100 dealerships in used car sales. We'd love to hear from you. Let us know what you think of the show and the topics we covered today. Send us an email at dailydrive@autonews.com or leave us a voicemail at 313-444-2774. And if you enjoyed the podcast, remember to like, leave a review, and subscribe so you never miss an episode.